Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Consultation. Clay Groves sat in Dr. Harold Cherry's office, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. Across from him, his wife Emma fidgeted with her purse strap, her eyes darting between the neurologist and the door. 4 years of these appointments, 4 years of hoping she'd remember their life before the accident, and still nothing but hollow smiles and rehearsed responses. "Mr. Groves," Dr. Cherry said, reviewing the MRI scans on his computer screen, "the results show no physical trauma that would explain the continued memory loss. In fact, the patterns we're seeing are unusual." Emma leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "I'd like to run some additional tests." The doctor's voice was steady, but Clay noticed how his fingers trembled slightly as he typed. "Mrs. Groves, would you mind stepping out to provide a urine sample? The nurse at the front desk will direct you." "Of course." Emma stood, clutching her purse tightly against her side. Something about the way she held it made Clay's architect's eye catch. The weight distribution was wrong, like she was carrying something heavy on one side. The moment the door closed, Dr. Cherry rolled his chair closer, his professional demeanor cracking. "Mr. Groves, you need to contact the authorities immediately." His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Your daughter." The door swung open. Emma stood in the threshold, her expression unreadable. "I forgot to ask where the restroom was." Her hand remained buried in her purse, and Clay saw her knuckles were white from gripping something. Dr. Cherry straightened, his face pale. "Down the hall, second door on the left." Emma's eyes lingered on both of them for a beat too long before she turned away. Clay waited until her footsteps faded. "What about my daughter?" "That child isn't." Dr. Cherry glanced at the door, then pulled out a business card and scribbled something on the back. "This is my personal number. Whatever you do, don't let on that you suspect anything. She's dangerous, Mr. Groves. I treated your family before the accident. That woman is not your wife, and that little girl is not Audrey." The words hit Clay like a wrecking ball, but he kept his face neutral. Years of client presentations had taught him to mask his reactions. He pocketed the card just as Emma returned, the weight in her purse still present. "All set?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All set," Clay replied, placing his hand on the girl's shoulder again. The child, whoever she was, remained silent, just as she'd been for most of the appointment. His real Audrey had been a chatterbox. They drove home in silence. Clay watched Emma in the passenger seat, really looked at her for the first time in months. The way she held herself, the small mannerisms. Now that the seed of doubt was planted, everything seemed wrong. The scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike as a kid was positioned slightly too high. Her laugh, which he'd attributed to trauma-induced changes, had a different quality entirely. That night, after putting the fake Audrey to bed, Clay stood in his home office, staring at the architectural plans for his latest project. But his mind was elsewhere, cataloging 4 years of subtle inconsistencies he'd dismissed. The way Emma recoiled from mushrooms, his real wife's favorite food. How she claimed not to remember their honeymoon in Barcelona, a trip they'd never taken. They'd gone to Iceland. The birthmark his daughter had on her left ankle. This child had clear skin. He'd been living with strangers. Imposters who knew just enough to be convincing, but not enough to be perfect. The real question that kept him awake that night: where was his real daughter, and what had happened to his wife? Chapter 2. Before the Fall. 4 years and 2 months earlier. Daddy watched. 6-year-old Audrey Groves launched herself off the rope swing, landing in a giggling heap on the grass. The real Emma, Clay's actual wife, laughed from the patio, her hand shading her eyes from the autumn sun. "Careful, Firefly," Clay called out, using his nickname for his daughter. "You're going to give your mother a heart attack." "I'm already having one," Emma said, but she was smiling. "Come eat before the lasagna gets cold." That Sunday afternoon represented everything Clay had built. A successful architecture firm with projects across 3 states. A beautiful home he designed himself in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, and a family that made every challenge worthwhile. Emma worked as a freelance photographer, her studio attached to the house. Audrey attended Riverside Elementary and wanted to be an astronaut veterinarian when she grew up. Clay's phone buzzed. A text from his cousin-in-law, Wanda Gordon. Sorry to miss lunch. Car trouble. We'll visit next week. He'd never warmed to Wanda, Emma's distant cousin who'd moved to Richmond 6 months prior. There was something calculating in her eyes, a hunger that made him uncomfortable. Emma, ever generous, had helped Wanda find an apartment and introduced her to their social circle. Is Wanda okay? Emma asked, reading over his shoulder. Says her car broke down. Again? That's the 3rd time this month. Emma frowned. Maybe we should help her get a new one. That was his Emma, always thinking of others, sometimes to a fault. 2 weeks later, Clay returned from a site inspection in Norfolk to find police cars in his driveway. A detective with tired eyes and a notebook introduced himself as Detective Stanley Francis. Mr. Groves, there's been an accident. The words that followed came in fragments. Head-on collision. Drunk driver crossed the median. Emma was killed instantly. Audrey in ICU with severe trauma. Clay remembered screaming, remembered the hospital's fluorescent lights, remembered Audrey's small body hooked to machines, her head wrapped in bandages. The doctor said she'd survive, but couldn't predict the extent of brain damage. Wanda appeared at the hospital that night. Clay, I'm so sorry. Emma was like a sister to me. Whatever you need, I'm here. Through the fog of grief, Clay barely noticed her. 3 months later, Audrey was recovering better than expected, physically, but the vibrant child who'd jumped from swings was gone, replaced by a quiet, withdrawn girl who barely spoke. Doctors attributed it to trauma, said she might improve with time and therapy. Wanda had become a constant presence, helping with meals, managing Audrey's medical appointments, filling the void Emma left. Clay, drowning in grief and trying to keep his business afloat, was grateful. You should come to dinner at my place, Wanda suggested one evening. Meet my boyfriend Kyle. He's been wanting to meet you. Says he admires your work. Kyle McKee was tall, charming, with slick back hair and a salesman's smile. He worked in investments, which Clay found deliberately vague, but Wanda seemed happy. Over the following months, Wanda practically moved in. Audrey seemed comfortable with her, which Clay took as a positive sign. His daughter was finally speaking again, relearning social skills. Then came the day, 9 months after Emma's death, when Wanda approached Clay with tears in her eyes. I've been thinking, she said. You know how much Emma meant to me. And I've been researching. There's a clinic in Switzerland that does incredible work with plastic surgery. Identity restoration procedures for accident victims, that sort of thing. She pulled out a brochure. What if I try to look like Emma? For Audrey's sake. The doctors say familiar faces help with childhood trauma. Clay should have seen it then. Should have recognized the manipulation. But he was exhausted, broken, and desperate to help his daughter. Wanda, I don't know if that's healthy. Just think about it. For Audrey. Present day. Clay sat in his office, reviewing bank statements from 4 years ago. The life insurance payout for Emma, $2 million. He'd signed control over to Emma, Wanda, 18 months ago, when she convinced him it would help her feel more integrated into their life. His business accounts showed systematic drainage, small amounts regularly transferred to offshore holdings he didn't recognize. He pulled up the police report from Emma's accident. The drunk driver, Floyd Monroe, had died at the scene. No family, no one to question the official story. Convenient. Clay opened his laptop and began a new document, Project Restoration. If these imposters had studied him, learned to replicate his life, then he would study them right back. And he'd use every skill he possessed to tear their facade apart. But first, he needed to know, was his real daughter alive? Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. Clay implemented his investigation with the same precision he applied to his architectural designs. Phase 1. Documentation. He installed miniature cameras throughout the house, in the living room bookshelf, the kitchen cabinet, his home office. Devices small enough to be invisible, but sophisticated enough to capture everything. The next morning, he initiated Phase 2. Testing. Emma, do you remember that restaurant where we had our first date? Clay asked over coffee, watching her face carefully. Of course, she said without hesitation. That Italian place on Main Street. You ordered the chicken parmesan. Wrong on both counts. Their first date had been a Vietnamese restaurant on Grove Avenue, and he'd ordered pho. The real Emma would have corrected him, laughed at his terrible attempt to use chopsticks. Right, Clay said, smiling. Good memory. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or triumph. She thought she'd passed his test. Throughout the day, he continued. Small questions, subtle traps. Emma failed every single one, but her confidence never wavered. She'd been trained well, Clay realized, given just enough information to seem plausible, but not enough to withstand scrutiny. That afternoon, while Emma was out grocery shopping, Clay focused on the child. The girl who was supposed to be his daughter sat in the living room, coloring with mechanical precision. Hey, Firefly, he said softly, using Audrey's nickname. The girl looked up, confusion crossing her face. My name is Audrey. His real daughter would have responded to Firefly instantly. It had been their special name, born from a camping trip when she was 4 and obsessed with catching lightning bugs. Right, sorry. Audrey, can I see your ankle for a second? I thought you had a scrape. She extended her left leg. Clear skin. No birthmark. His real Audrey had a distinctive strawberry-shaped mark on her left ankle, something that had been there since birth. Clay felt his chest tighten, but kept his expression neutral. My mistake. Looks fine. That evening, he reviewed the camera footage while Emma was in the shower. What he saw confirmed his darkest suspicions. The girl frequently glanced at Emma before answering questions, seeking approval or guidance. At one point, when she thought she was alone, she pulled out a small notebook and reviewed it, a script of Clay and Audrey's history. But the most damning footage came at 2:17 a.m. Clay watched on his phone from his locked office as Emma crept downstairs, made a phone call in whispers. Getting suspicious, she hissed. We might need to move up the timeline. No, I can handle it. The gun's ready. Tuesday night, when he gets home from the Norfolk site. Make it look like a robbery. Clay's blood ran cold. Tuesday was 3 days away. He spent Monday following Emma on her errands. She drove to a property in Hopewell, an hour south, an abandoned industrial building Clay didn't recognize. She went inside for 40 minutes. When she emerged, she was with Kyle McKee. Clay waited until they left, then approached the building. The lock was basic, easy to pick with tools from his car. Inside, the space was mostly empty except for a makeshift apartment in the back corner. His heart nearly stopped when he saw her. Audrey, his real daughter, now 10 years old, thin and frightened, chained to a radiator with enough slack to reach a mattress and a bucket. She had his eyes, Emma's smile, and that birthmark on her left ankle. Daddy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Clay wanted to grab her and run, but he forced himself to think strategically. If he rescued her now, Emma and Kyle would disappear, and he'd never get the full truth. He needed evidence, needed to ensure they'd pay for everything. Firefly, I found you, he said, kneeling beside her. But I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that? They said they'd kill you if I tried to escape or tell anyone. They said Mommy was dead because of me. Rage burned through Clay's veins, but he kept his voice steady. None of this is your fault. Your mom loved you more than anything. These people are liars. He examined the chain, padlocked but manageable. I'm going to get you out, but I need to do it smart. 2 more days. Can you hold on? Audrey nodded, brave despite her tears. I knew you'd find me. I knew you'd come. Clay took photos of everything. The chains, the conditions, Audrey's scared face. Then he did something that broke his heart. He left her there. But he placed a small GPS tracker on the radiator and a prepaid phone under the mattress. If anything happens, you call 911 with this. Hide it well. I'll be back Tuesday, I promise. On his way out, Clay examined the building's structure with professional eyes. It was his job to understand how buildings worked, how they stood, how they could be controlled. Ideas began forming. That night, he called Dr. Cherry from a burner phone. Dr. Cherry, it's Clay Groves. I need your help documenting everything you know about Emma and Audrey, the real ones. Medical records, dental records, any evidence that proves who they were. I've already started, the doctor said. I recognized something was wrong the moment I saw her. Your wife had a distinctive genetic marker in her blood work. I'd flagged it years ago as part of a research study. That woman has different DNA entirely. And the child's bone structure is all wrong for someone who supposedly was in that car accident. Can you testify to this? Absolutely. But Mr. Groves, what are you planning? To make sure they never hurt anyone again, Clay said. And to get my daughter back. He hung up and opened his laptop. Project Restoration moved into Phase 3, the trap. He began drafting plans, both architectural and tactical. By morning, he had a complete strategy. The imposters had studied him, learned his routines, planned his murder. Now Clay would show them what a real architect could build. Not just structures, but the perfect cage. Chapter 4. The Hidden Foundation. Clay spent Tuesday morning at his firm, acting as if nothing were amiss. He met with clients, reviewed blueprints for a new hospital wing, approved contractor bids. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating angles and timing with the precision that had made him one of Richmond's premier architects. At lunch, he drove to a storage facility across town and retrieved items he'd stashed the night before: industrial-grade chains, padlocks, welding equipment, and a folder thick with printed evidence. Everything he'd need. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "What time will you be home? Making your favorite, pot roast." Clay smiled grimly. His real Emma knew he hated pot roast. He'd been allergic to carrots his entire life, something any wife would remember. But Emma was making his favorite meal, probably planning to drug it before Kyle arrived to stage the robbery. Running late. Norfolk site has issues. Probably 8 p.m., he texted back. That gave him time. At 3 p.m., Clay arrived at the Hopewell building. He'd spent the previous night researching the property's ownership through back channels. It was owned by a shell corporation registered to Kyle McKee. Interesting. He picked the lock and slipped inside, moving quickly to where Audrey was kept. "Daddy," she whispered urgently. "They were here this morning. Kyle said something about tonight's the night. I know, Firefly. That's why we're doing this now." Clay pulled out his tools and began working on the padlock. It took 3 minutes to break it open. "Come on. We're going somewhere safe." "What about the other girl?" "Mandy." Clay froze. "What other girl?" "Mandy. She's Kyle's daughter. They make her pretend to be me at your house. She's not mean, just scared. Kyle hits her when she messes up." Another victim. Clay's jaw tightened. "Where is she now?" "At your house with Wanda. That's what Wanda's real name is. Kyle told her once when he was drunk." Clay carried Audrey to his car, then drove to his best friend's house. Alejandro Haley had been Clay's roommate in college and was now a criminal defense attorney. More importantly, he was trustworthy. "Al, I need you to keep Audrey safe for the next 12 hours. Don't call anyone, don't tell anyone." "Can you do that?" Alejandro took one look at Audrey's condition and nodded. "Whatever you need, brother. But after this is done, you're telling me everything." "Deal." Clay drove back to the Hopewell building, Phase 4 of his plan crystallizing. He spent the next 3 hours working, welding, constructing, preparing. The building's layout was perfect for what he had in mind: a single exit, reinforced walls, and a basement that could be sealed off. He'd analyzed the structure yesterday. Now he was modifying it. He set up cameras in every corner, connected to a cloud server. Whatever happened next would be documented from multiple angles. At 6:30 p.m., he called Detective Stanley Francis, the same detective who'd investigated Emma's accident 4 years ago. "Detective, this is Clay Groves. I have evidence of a murder conspiracy, kidnapping, and identity fraud. But I need you to trust me and follow my exact instructions." "Mr. Groves, if you have evidence." "I have my daughter, the real Audrey, who's been held captive for 4 years. I have video of her imprisonment, DNA evidence that my current wife is an imposter, and proof of a murder-for-hire plot against me scheduled for tonight. But if we move too soon, we won't get Kyle McKee, and he'll disappear." Silence. "Then, what do you need?" Clay laid out his plan. "Be at this address at 8:30 p.m. sharp, not a minute earlier. I'm going to get a full confession, and I'm going to make sure that girl living in my house, Mandy Keith, doesn't get hurt. She's another victim in this. Clay, don't do anything dangerous. Let us handle. They murdered my wife and held my daughter in chains for 4 years, detective. They were going to kill me tonight. I'm handling this. but I'm doing it by the book. Every second will be recorded. Just be there at 8:30. He hung up before Francis could argue. At 7:45 p.m., Clay texted Kyle McKee from a burner phone, spoofing Wanda's number. He's suspicious. Discovered cameras. Need you at Hopewell Building now. Bringing the package. The package being code for Audrey. Then Clay drove home. He entered through the back door, quiet as a shadow. Through the kitchen window, he could see Wanda. He couldn't think of her as Emma anymore, stirring something into a glass of wine. Mandy sat at the dining table, looking miserable. Clay moved quickly, slipping into the house through the garage entrance. He grabbed Mandy's hand before she could scream. "I know you're not my daughter," he whispered. "I know they're forcing you. I'm getting you out. Stay quiet." Tears filled Mandy's eyes as she nodded. They slipped back out through the garage just as Wanda called, "Audrey, dinner." Clay drove Mandy to Alejandro's house. 2 daughters to protect, now Al. "Jesus, Clay. What's going on?" "Justice," Clay said. Finally. Chapter 5. Load-bearing walls. At 8:15 p.m., Clay returned to the Hopewell Building. Kyle's car was already there. He'd taken the bait. Clay could hear him inside, shouting, "Wanda, where are you? Where's the kid?" Clay stepped inside, and Kyle spun around, his hand moving toward his waistband where Clay could see a gun. "Looking for someone?" Clay asked calmly. Kyle's eyes widened. "Groves, what are you doing here?" "This is my building now." "Well, legally it's yours through that shell corporation, but I'm the one who controls it now." Clay gestured to the modifications he'd made. "See, I'm an architect. I understand how structures work, how to turn them into something else entirely." "You're insane. Get out of my way." Kyle pulled the gun, but Clay was ready. He'd positioned himself near a support beam. He pressed a button on a remote in his pocket, and a steel security door slammed down behind Kyle, sealing off the only exit. "What the hell?" "Insurance," Clay said. "The building's original security system reactivated. Fire code compliant. It'll open in an emergency. But right now, you're not leaving until we have a conversation." Kyle raised the gun. "I'll shoot you right here." "Go ahead. But the police will be here in 10 minutes. I've already sent them everything. Video of you holding my daughter captive, financial records showing embezzlement from my accounts, phone records between you and Wanda discussing my murder." Clay's voice was steel. "Shoot me, and you'll die in prison. Or we can talk, and maybe you can make a deal." Kyle's hand trembled. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. You and Wanda killed my wife 4 years ago. You kidnapped my daughter. You've been draining my accounts, living in my house, planning to kill me tonight and make it look like a robbery." Clay's calm facade cracked slightly. "What I want to know is why. Why Emma? Why us?" Kyle laughed bitterly. "You want the truth? Fine. Wanda's been obsessed with you for years. She met you at that family reunion, 7 years ago? Talked about you constantly. When she found out about your wife's inheritance, the insurance policies, your business, it was too good to pass up. So you murdered her. Wanda did. Orchestrated the whole thing. The drunk driver? That was one of my guys, already dying of cancer. Paid his family 50 grand to do it. The car accident was real, but Emma was already dead when it happened. Wanda had poisoned her coffee that morning, made it look like she just passed out from impact." Clay's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his distance. "And Audrey, she saw too much. Was in the car when Emma drank the coffee. Saw Wanda do something to her. We couldn't risk her talking, so we kept her. Wanda got the plastic surgery, studied Emma's life from journals and photos. Took her 6 months to perfect it." Kyle's expression turned ugly. "Then we grabbed my daughter Mandy from my ex, trained her to play Audrey. It was perfect. We were going to drain you dry, then kill you and disappear. Why not just kill me from the start?" Wanda wanted to be Emma for a while. Live the life she thought she deserved. Plus, we needed time to access all your accounts, transfer assets without raising flags. You're worth more than we thought. Almost $8 million in total assets, properties, business equity. A car door slammed outside. Wanda's voice, "Kyle, where are you?" Clay pressed another button. A second security door dropped, sealing the building's other entrance. Wanda's scream echoed through the walls. "What did you do?" Kyle lunged forward, but Clay was faster. He grabbed a pipe wrench he'd positioned earlier and swung hard, connecting with Kyle's wrist. The gun clattered away. They grappled, Kyle's superior size initially overwhelming Clay. But Clay had rage on his side, for years of suppressed fury. He'd spent the last 6 months boxing at his gym, preparing himself without knowing what for. He landed a solid hit to Kyle's jaw, then another to his ribs. Kyle fell, gasping. Clay kicked the gun away and restrained him with zip ties he'd prepared. "You're going to tell the police everything," Clay said. "Every detail, every person involved. And you're going to testify against Wanda." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'll make sure the prosecutor knows you cooperated. Because your daughter Mandy deserves better than you. And because if you don't, I'll make sure every inmate in whatever prison you end up in knows you hurt children." Kyle's face went pale. Wanda was pounding on the security door now, screaming. Clay walked to the intercom system he'd installed. "Hello, Wanda. Or should I call you by your real name?" Silence. Then Clay, "Whatever Kyle told you, he's lying. I love you. I only wanted to help after Emma died. Save it. The police are outside. We have video of Audrey, your confession to Kyle last night about killing me tonight, financial records of every penny you stole. It's over. You can't prove anything. I can prove everything. Dr. Cherry has the real Emma's DNA records. He's willing to testify that you're not her. We have Audrey, the real Audrey, safe and ready to identify you. We have Mandy, who's already told us everything about how you threatened her." Clay's voice was ice. "You studied me, Wanda. You learned my routines, my business, my life. But you made one mistake. You underestimated what I do to protect my daughter." He pressed a button, and the external security door raised. Police swarmed in, Detective Francis in the lead. "Clay, are you okay?" "Better than okay. Kyle McKee is restrained in the back room. He's confessed to everything on camera. The cameras are streaming to a cloud server, so the footage is preserved. Wanda Gordon is in the front section. You'll find Emma's journals at their apartment on Morrison Street, along with Wanda's surgery records and planning documents." Francis nodded to his officers. "Take the both in. Read them their rights." As Wanda was led past Clay in handcuffs, she spat at him. "You'll never prove Emma's dead. We cremated her body. No evidence." Clay smiled coldly. "Actually, Kyle just told me you poisoned her before staging the accident. That means toxicology in her remains. And I'm betting you kept something of Emma's. You were obsessed enough to do it. When we search your apartment, what'll we find? A trophy? A keepsake?" Her face confirmed it. "They'd find something." "You're a monster," Wanda hissed. "No," Clay said quietly. "I'm a father who got his daughter back. You're the monster, and you're going to spend the rest of your life paying for what you did." Chapter 6. Bearing the Weight. The police station at 11 p.m. was a fluorescent-lit purgatory. Clay sat in an interview room, giving his statement for the 3rd time while Detective Francis recorded everything. "And you're certain you didn't assault Kyle McKee beyond necessary self-defense?" "He had a gun, Detective. I defended myself and restrained him. Your officers can see the weapon was his, and the cameras show everything that happened." Francis nodded. "The cameras are admissible. Everything you did was technically legal. Citizen's arrest, self-defense, and you called us before the confrontation. But Clay, you cut it damn close. If things had gone wrong." "They didn't." Clay's voice was firm. "Is my daughter being examined?" "Dr. Cherry's with her now. Medical team, trauma counselors, the works. She's asking for you. And Mandy Keith, Child Services has her. She's cooperating fully. Her mother died 2 years ago, and Kyle had custody. She's been threatened and abused this whole time. We'll find her a proper foster situation." Francis leaned forward. "Kyle's already trying to make a deal. His lawyer wants to trade testimony for a reduced sentence. Let him. I want Wanda to get everything she deserves. The evidence is overwhelming. We found Emma's wedding ring in Wanda's apartment, along with hospital bracelets from Audrey's birth photo albums. She kept trophies. And get this, she had a journal detailing the whole plan, including Emma's murder. She couldn't resist documenting her perfect crime." Clay closed his eyes. "Thank God for narcissists. There's more. We're investigating their finances and found connections to an identity fraud ring. Wanda and Kyle did this to at least 3 other families over the past decade. Different approach each time, but always targeting widowers or wealthy couples. You weren't their first, Clay. The weight of that settled on Clay's shoulders. How many people did they kill? We're not sure yet, but you stopped them. Those other victims' families will get justice now, too. Hours later, Clay was finally allowed to see Audrey in the hospital. She was in a private room, Dr. Cherry standing nearby with a gentle smile. She's going to be okay, the doctor said. Physically, she's malnourished and has some vitamin deficiencies, but nothing permanent. Psychologically, she'll need time and therapy. But she's strong, like her father. Audrey was awake, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion. Daddy, Clay rushed to her side, pulling her into a careful hug. She was so thin, so fragile. I'm so sorry, Firefly. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. You found me. That's what matters. She pulled back, searching his face. Is Mommy really gone? Clay's heart broke. Yes, baby. She's really gone. But she loved you so much. Everything she did was to protect you and make you happy. Tears streamed down Audrey's face. I miss her. I miss her too. They held each other, grieving properly for the first time in 4 years. Chapter 7, Demolition. The trial began 6 months later. Clay sat in the courtroom gallery, Audrey beside him. She'd insisted on attending, wanting to see justice served. She was healthier now, putting on weight, laughing again. But the shadows in her eyes remained. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented video evidence of Audrey's captivity. Dr. Cherry's testimony about Emma's DNA records proving Wanda was an imposter. Mandy Keith's tearful testimony about being forced to impersonate Audrey. Kyle McKee's confession. He'd taken a plea deal for life with possibility of parole after 30 years in exchange for full cooperation. Financial records showing systematic theft of $3.2 million. Wanda's journal detailing the murder plot. Toxicology reports from Emma's cremated remains showing lethal doses of thallium poisoning. The defense tried to argue that Wanda had been manipulated by Kyle, that she was a victim too. But the journal entries destroyed that narrative. They showed calculated planning, excitement about becoming Emma, and detailed fantasies about the life she'd steal. On the 4th day, Clay took the stand. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Eleanor Holden, walked him through his testimony. Mr. Groves, when did you first suspect something was wrong? For years of small things. But I blamed myself, thought I was imagining problems because of grief. It wasn't until Dr. Cherry's warning that I allowed myself to consider the truth. And what did you do when you discovered your daughter's location? I planned carefully. I knew if I went to the police immediately, Kyle might disappear and we'd never recover all the stolen money or find the other victims. I needed a full confession. Some might say you took the law into your own hands. I acted within the law. I documented everything, called the police before the confrontation, and ensured everyone's safety. My priority was getting my daughter back and making sure these people could never hurt anyone else. Wanda's lawyer, a desperate-looking public defender named Stuart Nolan, tried to shake him during cross-examination. Mr. Groves, isn't it true that you were negligent in not recognizing your own wife and daughter were replaced? Clay met his eyes steadily. I was a grieving widower trying to raise a traumatized child while running a business. They had plastic surgery, years to study my family, and they were very, very good at deception. But yes, I blame myself for not seeing it sooner. That's something I'll carry forever. The honesty deflated the lawyer's attack. On the 8th day, Wanda took the stand against her lawyer's advice. She was unrecognizable from the woman who'd lived in Clay's house. Prison had stripped away the carefully maintained appearance. But more than that, her mask had finally cracked. I loved him, she said, her voice breaking. I loved Clay from the moment I met him. Emma didn't deserve him. She was careless with his love, took him for granted. You poisoned her, Eleanor Holden interrupted. You murdered her and kidnapped her child. She would have ruined him. She was going to leave him. Did you know that? I found her journal. She was unhappy, wanted a divorce. I saved him from that pain. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Clay sat frozen. Emma had never mentioned unhappiness. But then again, They'd been going through a rough patch before her death. He'd attributed it to work stress. Eleanor pressed on. So you killed her to save Mr. Groves? And then you planned to kill him too? That was Kyle's idea. I would never. I wanted us to be together. The plan to murder Mr. Groves is in your handwriting in your journal, dated 6 months ago. Wanda's composure shattered completely. He stopped seeing me, stopped touching me. After 2 years, he still looked at me like I was a stranger. I did everything right, studied everything about Emma, became her, and he never loved me, never even liked me. It was supposed to be perfect. So you decided to take his money and his life. I deserved it. I gave up 4 years, had surgery, played the perfect wife, and he gave me nothing. The confession was complete. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, kidnapping, fraud, attempted murder, child abuse. Mandatory life without parole. Kyle McKee received life with possibility of parole after 30 years. Chapter 8. Rebuilding. 18 months after the trial, Clay stood in front of a new building, a community center he designed and funded. The Emma Groves Memorial Center for Families and Healing. It offered free therapy for crime victims, support groups for grieving families, and educational programs about identity fraud prevention. Audrey cut the ribbon, now 12 years old and starting to look like her mother. She'd been in therapy twice a week and was finally starting to heal. She'd returned to school, made new friends, even joined the robotics club. Your mom would be proud, Clay told her. I think she is, Audrey said. I like to think she's watching. Detective Francis approached, now retired but still following the case's aftermath. Thought you'd want to know, we've identified 4 other families that Wanda and Kyle targeted. 2 more murders, several cases of fraud. Because of your evidence, we've been able to bring justice to all of them. Clay nodded. Good. That's good. How are you doing? Really? Better. Some days are harder than others. But I got my daughter back, and that's everything. He paused. I've been thinking about Emma a lot. About whether she really was unhappy, whether I missed signs. Don't torture yourself. Wanda was a liar. That journal entry she mentioned? Probably fake. Something she fabricated to justify her actions to herself. Maybe, but I'm trying to be honest about our marriage. We weren't perfect, and that's okay. I loved her, she loved me, but we were human. I don't need to mythologize her to honor her memory. Francis clapped his shoulder. That's healthy perspective, son. Inside the center, Clay gave a speech to the assembled crowd, donors, city officials, families they'd helped. He talked about loss, justice, and a long road of healing. He talked about Emma, the real Emma, with all her flaws and beauty. He talked about the importance of vigilance, of trusting your instincts, of fighting for truth. But mostly, he talked about hope. That evening, Clay and Audrey walked through the park near their home. Not the old house, but a new one Clay had designed. Smaller, cozier, without ghosts. Dad, can I ask you something? Always Firefly. Do you think you'll ever get married again? Clay considered the question. Maybe someday. If I meet someone who loves us both, who I can trust completely. But I'm not looking. We're good, just the 2 of us. Audrey smiled. Yeah, we are. They walked in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the sky orange and gold. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 3 years after the trial, Clay Groves stood in his architecture firm's conference room, presenting a design to a new client. Life had found its rhythm again. Work, parenting, occasional dates that never went anywhere. He was content with that. Audrey, now 15, had started volunteering at the Emma Groves Memorial Center, helping younger kids who'd experienced trauma. She wanted to be a therapist someday, to help others heal the way she'd been helped. Mandy Keith, Kyle's daughter, had been adopted by a loving family and stayed in touch with Audrey. They'd formed a bond, 2 survivors of the same nightmare. Mandy was thriving in school, no longer the frightened child she'd been. The legal aftermath continued. Wanda had filed appeal after appeal, all denied. She'd be in prison for life. Kyle had been denied parole at his first hearing. The board found him to be a continuing danger. He'd serve at least another 20 years before they'd consider it again. The stolen money had been recovered and returned to Clay and the other victims' families. Clay had donated most of his portion to victim advocacy groups and the Memorial Center. One Saturday morning, Clay was working in his home office when Audrey appeared in the doorway. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's up?" "I want to write about what happened. Not for publication or anything, just for me, to process it all. Would that be okay?" Clay set down his pen. "Of course. Writing can be very therapeutic. Will you help me remember the good things about Mom? Not just what Wanda did, but who Mom really was." "I'd be honored." They spent the afternoon looking through photo albums Clay had kept locked away, sharing stories about Emma. The real Emma. Funny, flawed, sometimes scattered, always loving. They laughed and cried, and it felt like another layer of healing. That evening, after Audrey went to bed, Clay stood in his backyard, looking at the stars. He thought about Emma, about the life they'd built and lost. He thought about Wanda's obsession, the delusion that you could become someone else and steal their life. But you couldn't steal a life. You couldn't steal love or trust or the 1,000 small moments that made a relationship real. Wanda had learned that the hard way. Clay had learned something too, that he was stronger than he'd known. That love for his daughter could sustain him through anything. That justice, while not always swift, could still prevail. He pulled out his phone and looked at a text from Dr. Cherry. "Check out the Times article. Your center just got a major feature. They're calling it a model for victim services nationwide." Clay smiled. Something good had come from the nightmare. Emma's memory was helping others heal. He went inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to bed. Tomorrow he'd review blueprints for a new school. Next week, he'd attend Audrey's parent-teacher conference. Next month, they'd take a vacation to Iceland, the trip he and Emma had actually taken on their honeymoon, a place Audrey had never seen. Life went on. Wounds healed. The foundation they'd almost lost was rebuilt, stronger than before. And somewhere, he hoped, Emma was at peace, knowing her family had survived and justice had been served. The story of Clay Groves was one of patience, intelligence, and a father's unbreakable love. He'd faced evil wearing a familiar face and had defeated it not with rage or violence, but with careful planning and the truth. In the end, that was the best revenge of all, living well, protecting what mattered, and ensuring that those who tried to destroy his family would spend their lives paying for it. The architect had built something new from the rubble, not just buildings, but hope itself. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Rob Mitchell had built his life on two principles, loyalty and strength. At 42, he carried himself with the measured precision of a man who had seen combat in 3 different countries and survived worse than most people could imagine. His weathered hands, scarred from years as a special forces operative before transitioning to private security consulting, now spent their days building something he thought would last forever, a family. The Mitchell household on Maple Street looked like every other suburban dream. Rob had purchased the 2-story colonial with cash after his final overseas contract, determined to give his wife Linda and their 8-year-old daughter Emma the stability he'd never known growing up in foster care. Linda, with her honey blonde hair and doe eyes, had seemed like salvation when they met 6 years ago at a charity gala. She was volunteering at the children's booth, and Emma, then 2 and recently adopted by Rob as a single father, had immediately gravitated toward Linda's gentle demeanor. What Rob didn't see then, blinded by hope and loneliness, was the calculated way Linda assessed his bank account, his property, his potential. Linda Reeves had grown up in a family where appearance mattered more than substance, where her mother taught her that a woman's security came from the man she could catch, not the life she could build. At 28 when they married, Linda was already perfecting the art of being whatever someone needed her to be. Their marriage had been comfortable, if not passionate. Rob worked long hours consulting for corporate security firms, building a reputation that commanded premium rates. Linda managed their social calendar, joining the right neighborhood committees, befriending the right wives. Emma thrived in school, her natural intelligence shining despite the trauma of her early years in the system. But comfort had bred carelessness in Linda. The thrill of playing the perfect wife began to wear thin, especially when Rob's work demanded frequent travel. That's when Derek Phillips entered their orbit. Derek was everything Rob wasn't. Smooth where Rob was direct, charming where Rob was intense, weak where Rob was strong. He'd moved to their neighborhood 8 months ago, taking over his deceased father's struggling accounting firm. At 35, Derek was divorced, attractive in a non-threatening way, and desperately insecure beneath his practiced smile. He'd noticed Linda immediately at the neighborhood barbecue, the way she seemed restless despite her perfect life. Their affair began with stolen glances across the yard during block parties, progressed to afternoon coffee while Rob traveled, and culminated in afternoon encounters at Derek's office above the old bank building downtown. Linda told herself it wasn't serious, just excitement, something to fill the void of a marriage that had become predictable. Rob sensed something had shifted. Linda's laughter seemed forced, her affection mechanical. She developed new interests, yoga classes that ran late, book clubs that met frequently, volunteer work that demanded odd hours. But Rob had learned in the military that suspicion without evidence was poison, so he waited, watched, and hoped he was wrong. The first real crack appeared 3 weeks ago when Emma came home crying from her Aunt Carol's house, Linda's sister who lived across town. Carol's twin boys, both 10 years old, had pushed Emma off their trampoline, calling her names about being adopted. When Rob confronted Linda about it, she dismissed it as kids being kids and suggested Emma was too sensitive. But Rob knew his daughter. Emma was resilient, tougher than most kids her age had to be. If she was crying, someone had crossed a line. That night, he began paying closer attention to everything. Linda's phone calls, her schedules, the way she avoided his eyes when she spoke. The pattern became clear with sickening clarity. Linda was closest to Carol, who'd been covering for her sister's indiscretions for months. Carol's boys were parroting things they'd overheard their mother saying about Emma, about Rob, about their family. The cruelty toward Emma wasn't random childhood bullying. It was learned behavior from adults who had lost respect for Rob and his family. Rob's hands tightened around his coffee mug as he sat in his study that evening, pieces of betrayal clicking into place like the components of a weapon he'd assembled too many times to count. Outside, Linda was tending her garden, humming softly, oblivious to the storm gathering behind his quiet eyes. Emma burst through the front door, backpack dragging behind her, her face flushed with excitement about something that happened at school. In that moment, watching his daughter's pure joy, Rob felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Whatever Linda had done, whatever she was planning to do, Emma would be protected. And anyone who threatened that protection would learn exactly why Robert Mitchell had earned his reputation in places where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. The foundation of their perfect suburban life was about to crumble, and Rob would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The neighborhood block party was Linda's idea, as most social gatherings were. She'd spent the morning arranging flowers and preparing her famous potato salad, playing the role of perfect hostess with practiced ease. Rob watched her from the kitchen window as she flitted between neighbors, her smile bright and engaging, her laughter carrying across the yard. Derek Phillips arrived fashionably late, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing he belonged. Rob observed the subtle dance between his wife and the newcomer, the way Derek's eyes found Linda immediately, how she seemed to glow under his attention, the carefully orchestrated coincidental moments when they ended up near each other. Emma spent most of the party playing with the younger kids, but Rob noticed how she avoided her cousins, Carol's twin boys Jason and Kyle. When the boys started a game of tag, Emma hung back, suddenly finding reasons to help Linda with serving duties instead of joining the fun. "She's being antisocial," Carol commented to Linda, loud enough for Rob to hear. Maybe she needs to learn to toughen up a bit. My boys could teach her. Rob set down his beer with deliberate control. Emma's fine the way she is. Carol's smile was sharp around the edges. Of course she is. But sometimes kids need to learn the real world isn't going to coddle them. Especially kids who, well, you know how it is. The pause before you know how it is hung in the air like a slap. Rob felt his jaw tighten, but Linda quickly intervened with nervous laughter. Carol, don't be silly. Emma's just tired from school. But Rob caught the look that passed between the sisters, complicit, knowing. They discussed Emma before, probably in ways that would make his blood boil if he knew the details. The party continued without incident until Derek offered to help Linda clean up. Rob was talking to their neighbor Mike about contractor recommendations when he noticed the easy familiarity between Derek and Linda as they moved around each other in the kitchen. Derek knew where the dishes belonged, where Linda kept the serving spoons. He'd been in their kitchen before, often enough to learn the layout. That night, after Emma was asleep and Linda was taking one of her increasingly long baths, Rob did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He went through her phone. The messages were carefully deleted, but Linda had never been particularly tech-savvy. Rob's military training included digital forensics, and it took him less than an hour to recover 3 months of conversations that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. Derek, missed you today. When's your husband traveling again? Linda, next week. 3 days in Atlanta. We'll have the afternoons. Derek, can't wait to have you to myself. This sneaking around is getting harder. Linda, I know. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we just didn't have to hide anymore. Derek, Rob would destroy both of us. Guy give me the creeps. Like he's always watching, waiting for something. Linda, he's not as tough as he pretends. All that military stuff is just for show. He's actually pretty predictable. The messages went deeper, uglier. Linda complaining about Rob's cold nature, his obsession with Emma, his paranoid attention to detail. Derek feeding her resentment, painting himself as the understanding alternative to Rob's intensity. But the message that made Rob's vision narrow to a tunnel of pure rage was from 2 weeks ago. Linda, Emma keeps asking questions about why we don't spend time with her anymore. Maybe we should back off for a while. Derek, the kid's not even yours by blood. Why let her control your life? Carol's right. You've babied her too long. Linda, you're right. She needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around her. Maybe spending time with Jason and Kyle will teach her some resilience. Rob set the phone down with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of controlling the violence that wanted to explode from his chest. They'd been using Emma as a pawn, deliberately exposing her to Carol's boy's cruelty to teach her resilience. His daughter, who'd already survived abandonment and the foster system, was being tortured for the convenience of his wife's affair. He sat in his study until dawn, staring at the wall where Emma's artwork hung next to her school photos. By the time Linda came downstairs for her morning coffee, Rob had made a series of decisions that would change everything. I'm taking Emma to Carol's this afternoon, Linda announced, not meeting his eyes. The boys want to play, and I think it's good for her to interact with family. Rob nodded slowly. Good idea. Maybe I'll come along. Linda's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. Oh, you don't need to do that. I know you're busy with work. I'm never too busy for Emma. Linda forced a smile. Of course not. I just meant, Carol's boys can be a handful. You might find it stressful. I think I can handle a couple of 10-year-olds. Something flickered in Linda's eyes. Calculation, concern. But she nodded and turned away, her phone already buzzing with what Rob knew would be frantic messages to Derek about the change in plans. That afternoon, Rob would finally see the full scope of his family's betrayal. And Linda, Derek, and everyone who'd enabled them would learn that Robert Mitchell's reputation for being dangerous wasn't military mythology. It was a promise. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Carol's house sat on 3 acres outside the main neighborhood, giving her boys plenty of space to run wild. The property backed up to dense woods, and Carol had often bragged about the natural playground it provided for active children. Rob had always found the isolation unsettling, but now, pulling into the gravel driveway with Linda and Emma, it felt ominous. Carol greeted them at the door with her usual brittle enthusiasm. At 34, she was Linda's older sister by 2 years, with the same blonde hair but harder edges around her eyes and mouth. Her ex-husband had left 18 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences, though Rob suspected Carol's volatile nature and drinking problem had been the real catalysts. "Rob, what a surprise," Carol said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Linda didn't mention you were coming." "Last-minute decision," Rob replied, watching how Carol's gaze darted to Linda with something approaching panic. Emma hung close to Rob's side as they entered the house. The living room was cluttered with video game controllers, empty soda cans, and the general chaos of unsupervised children. Jason and Kyle were sprawled on the couch, their attention fixed on a violent video game that seemed inappropriate for their age. "Boys, Emma's here," Carol announced. Kyle glanced over, his expression shifting to something unpleasant. "Great, the baby's back." "Kyle," Carol said without conviction, making no real effort to correct him. Jason paused the game and turned to face Emma fully. "Mom says you're not really part of our family anyway. Dad says Uncle Rob got stuck with damaged goods." The words hung in the air like physical blows. Emma's face crumpled, but before Rob could respond, Linda laughed nervously. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they?" Rob felt something fundamental shift inside him. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted with his daughter's well-being, was standing there making excuses for deliberate cruelty toward an 8-year-old child. His child. "Emma, why don't you go play in the backyard?" Linda suggested. "The boys can show you their new trampoline." Emma looked up at Rob with pleading eyes, but Linda was already ushering her toward the back door. "Go on, sweetheart. Have fun." Rob followed them outside, his senses heightened in the way they'd been trained during reconnaissance missions. Carol poured herself a large glass of wine despite it being only 3 in the afternoon, and Linda checked her phone constantly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The boys led Emma to the large trampoline set up near the tree line. What happened next will be burned into Rob's memory forever. "Only real family gets to go first," Jason announced, climbing onto the trampoline. Kyle followed, and they began jumping aggressively, making the surface unstable. "Come on, Emma," Kyle called. "If you can get on, you can jump with us." Emma approached hesitantly. As she tried to climb up, Jason deliberately jumped hard, sending her tumbling backward onto the ground. She landed awkwardly, clutching her arm. "Oops," Kyle said with a laugh. "Guess you're not tough enough." Emma sat on the grass, tears streaming down her face, holding her arm. Rob started forward, but Linda was already moving. "Emma, get up," Linda said sharply. "You're fine." "My arm hurts," Emma whimpered. "You just fell." "Stop being dramatic." Linda's voice carried across the yard, and Rob felt his world tilt sideways. This wasn't the loving stepmother who'd read Emma bedtime stories and helped with homework. This was a stranger wearing Linda's face. Carol appeared beside Linda, wine glass in hand. "She's a bit sensitive, isn't she? The boys play rougher than that all the time." "He's a boy," Linda said, gesturing toward Jason. She must have said something to upset him. The words hit Rob like physical blows. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with everything, was not only failing to protect Emma, but actively participating in her humiliation. Emma looked around the yard, seeking help from the adults who were supposed to protect her. Finding none, she sat there holding her arm, trying not to cry harder. That's when Rob moved. He walked across the yard with deadly calm, his footsteps silent on the grass. He knelt beside Emma, gently examining her arm. It wasn't broken, but it was definitely tender. "Boys," he said softly, not looking up from Emma. "Come here." Jason and Kyle exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. There was something in Rob's voice that made the air feel dangerous. "Now," Rob said, still quiet. They climbed down from the trampoline, moving with reluctant steps. Rob stood slowly, keeping Emma behind him. When he looked at the boys, they instinctively took a step back. His eyes held the kind of cold focus they'd seen in movies, but never experienced in real life. "You pushed my daughter," Rob said. "On purpose." "We were just playing," Jason stammered. "No." Rob's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. "You hurt her deliberately." And then you laughed about it. Carol hurried over, her wine sloshing. Rob, they're just kids. You're scaring them. Rob ignored her, his attention fixed on Linda. Tell them to apologize. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Rob, maybe we should just tell them to apologize. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Linda looked between Rob and her sister, calculation flickering in her eyes. Finally, she shook her head. They're boys, Rob. Emma needs to learn to handle herself. Maybe she should apologize for disrupting their game. The world went very quiet. Rob could hear his heartbeat, feel the blood moving through his veins. Emma looked up at him with trust and confusion, waiting for him to fix this the way he always fixed things. Rob smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Emma, he said gently. Come here, sweetheart. He picked her up, settling her against his hip. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he could feel her small body shaking with suppressed tears. Rob looked at Linda for a long moment, memorizing her face. Then he turned and walked toward the house without a word. Rob, where are you going? Linda called after him. He didn't answer. He walked through Carol's house, out the front door, and loaded Emma into his truck. Linda appeared as he was buckling Emma's seatbelt. Rob, don't be ridiculous. We drove here together. Call Derek, Rob said quietly. I'm sure he'll give you a ride. Linda's face went white. What's that supposed to mean? Rob got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Through the windshield, he could see Linda's mouth moving, her hands gesturing frantically. But he was done listening to her voice. As they drove away, Emma finally spoke. Daddy, are we going home? Yes, baby, we're going home. But home was about to become something very different. Because in 48 hours, Rob was going to make a phone call that would change everything. And Linda, Derek, Carol, and everyone who'd participated in hurting his daughter would learn that some men don't just get angry. They get even. Chapter 4, The Call. 2 days after leaving Carol's house, Rob sat in his study with Emma curled up in the chair beside him, reading a book about horses. Her arm was fine. No real damage done. But the emotional impact lingered in the way she stayed close to him, seeking reassurance that the adults in her world could still be trusted. Linda had been trying to normalize the situation ever since they'd returned home. She made Emma's favorite pancakes, suggested a trip to the toy store, and asked repeatedly if Rob was still upset about the silly misunderstanding at Carol's. Each attempt at casual dismissal only deepened Rob's resolve. The phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Rob had been expecting this call. Mr. Mitchell? This is Detective Angela Rodriguez with the State Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Derek Phillips. Rob glanced at Emma, who was absorbed in her book, then stepped into the hallway. What about Mr. Phillips? Sir, we have reason to believe Mr. Phillips has been involved in some serious financial irregularities. We'd like to discuss your relationship with him and any business dealings you might have had. I see, Rob said carefully. When would be convenient? Would this afternoon work? We can meet at our field office, or if you prefer, we can come to you. The office would be fine. Should I bring an attorney? That's your choice, sir. At this point, we're just gathering information. Mr. Phillips listed you as a character reference on some loan applications, so we're talking to everyone who knows him professionally. Rob smiled into the phone. Of course. I'll be there in an hour. The conversation had been perfectly choreographed because Detective Rodriguez didn't exist. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, a former military intelligence specialist who now ran a private investigation firm in the state capital. Rob had worked with Maria on 3 overseas contracts, and she owed him her life from extraction in Moldova that had gone sideways. Rob had called Maria 3 days ago with a simple request. Create a scenario that would require Derek Phillips to come to the local police station for questioning about financial crimes. It didn't need to be real, just convincing enough to get Derek alone and nervous for several hours while Rob set other pieces in motion. Linda was in the kitchen when Rob came downstairs. I need to run some errands, he told her. Will you be here with Emma? Of course, Linda said, not looking up from her laptop. She'd been typing frantically for the past hour, probably updating Derek about the mysterious developments. Rob kissed Emma goodbye and drove to the strip mall downtown where Derek's accounting office was located. The building was old, with narrow hallways and thin walls, perfect for what Rob had planned. Derek's secretary had left early for a dentist appointment, according to the note on the outer door. Derek himself was nowhere to be seen, which meant Maria's fake police call had worked perfectly. Rob used a key he'd had made weeks ago. Lifting Derek's keys during a neighborhood gathering had been embarrassingly easy, and let himself into the office. Rob had spent 2 decades learning how to disappear evidence, plant false trails, and make people believe things that weren't true. Derek's office computer took less than 20 minutes to compromise completely. Rob installed software that would log every keystroke, record every phone call, and transmit copies of all communications to an encrypted server. But the surveillance equipment was just the beginning. Rob moved through Derek's office like a professional, photographing documents, copying files, and building a comprehensive picture of Derek's life, finances, and weaknesses. What he found was better than he'd hoped. Derek Phillips was drowning in debt. His father's accounting firm was hemorrhaging money. Clients were leaving in droves, and Derek had been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle. More interesting were the corners Derek had been cutting. Tax filings that were questionable, client funds that had been temporarily borrowed, relationships with business owners who operated in gray legal areas. None of it was serious enough for actual criminal charges, but all of it was serious enough to destroy Derek's reputation and livelihood if presented correctly. Rob was finishing his work when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He slipped into Derek's private bathroom and waited. Derek burst into his office, talking rapidly on his phone. "I don't understand why they call me down there. They said something about loan applications and character references, but I haven't applied for any loans recently." A pause, then, "Linda, I'm scared. If they start digging into my business, they might find other things that could hurt both of us." Another pause. "No, we can't meet tonight. If they're watching me, we need to be careful. Maybe we should cool things off for a while." Rob smiled in the darkness of the bathroom. Fear was making Derek paranoid, driving a wedge between him and Linda. Phase 1 was complete. Derek ended his call and spent the next hour frantically organizing files and deleting computer records. Each action was being recorded by Rob's surveillance equipment, building a digital trail that would be useful later. When Derek finally left for the day, Rob emerged from his hiding place and made one final addition to the office. A small recording device, virtually undetectable, positioned to capture every conversation Derek had in his office for the next several weeks. Rob drove home as the sun was setting, his mind already moving to phase 2. Emma ran to greet him at the door, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Linda made my favorite dinner, and she said we could watch a movie tonight." Rob hugged his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Over Emma's head, he could see Linda watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression carefully arranged into a mask of domestic contentment. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Rob said. "Why don't you go pick out the movie while I talk to Linda for a minute?" Emma scampered upstairs, and Linda approached with cautious steps. "How were your errands?" she asked. "Productive," Rob replied. "Very productive." Linda searched his face for clues, but Rob had learned long ago how to reveal nothing when it mattered. He moved past her toward the kitchen, already planning the next day's activities. "Rob," Linda's voice was strained. "Is everything okay between us?" Rob turned back to her, letting his gaze linger on her face. She was still beautiful, still perfectly put together. But now he could see the calculation behind her eyes, the constant measuring of angles and advantages. "Everything's fine, Linda. Just fine." That night, as they watched Emma's movie together on the couch, Rob felt the strange peace that came with absolute certainty. He knew exactly what he was going to do, exactly how each piece would fall. Linda sat beside him, probably believing she'd weathered the worst of his suspicion, planning her next meeting with Derek. She had no idea that her world was about to implode in ways she couldn't imagine. And Derek, sitting in his office 3 miles away, reviewing his files for anything that might interest law enforcement, had no idea that he was already caught in a trap that was just beginning to close. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Maria, "Package delivered successfully. Target very cooperative and very nervous. Ready for phase 2 when you are." Rob deleted the message and pulled Emma closer as the movie continued. His daughter's laughter filled the room, pure and trusting, reminding him exactly why he was willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Derek's paranoia grew like cancer over the next week. The fake police questioning had shaken him more than Rob had anticipated, and the surveillance equipment captured a man slowly coming apart. Derek checked his locks 3 times each night, jumped at unexpected sounds, and began drinking heavily after office hours. But it was the phone call from Linda that pushed Derek over the edge. I think Rob knows. Linda's voice came through crystal clear on the recording device. He's been different since Carol's house. Watching me, asking strange questions. What kind of questions? Derek's voice was strained. Yesterday, he asked how long I've known you. Today, he wanted to see my phone to look up a restaurant number. He's never done that before. Maybe we should stop seeing each other for a while, just until things calm down. Derek, I need you to understand something. Linda's voice took on a cold edge that Rob recognized, but Derek apparently didn't. If Rob finds out about us, he'll destroy both of us. But if you abandon me now, I'll destroy you first. There was a long silence. What's that supposed to mean? I know about your money problems. I know you've been borrowing from client accounts. I know about the tax returns you've been filing. If you want my protection from Rob, you'd better not even think about throwing me away. Rob listened to the recording from his truck, parked outside Derek's office building. Through the second-floor window, he could see Derek pacing behind his desk, looking increasingly frantic. Linda wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was manipulative, calculating, and dangerous. She'd been collecting leverage on Derek the same way she'd probably been collecting it on Rob. Insurance policies for when relationships became inconvenient. Rob's phone rang. Carol's name appeared on the screen. Rob, we need to talk, Carol said without preamble. Linda called me crying this morning. She thinks you're planning to leave her. Is that so? She's worried about Emma. If you divorce Linda, what happens to Emma's relationship with our family? Rob felt his jaw tighten. Emma's relationship with your family? Well, Linda's been like a mother to her, and the boys have gotten so close to their cousin. It would be devastating to break up that bond. The sheer audacity of the lie took Rob's breath away. Carol was rewriting history, painting Linda as a devoted stepmother and her cruel sons as loving cousins. Carol, your boys pushed Emma off a trampoline and called her damaged goods. Oh, Rob, that's not what happened at all. Linda explained everything. Emma misunderstood some typical boy behavior and got her feelings hurt. You know how sensitive she can be. Rob ended the call without another word. Carol and Linda had coordinated their story, creating a version of events where Emma was the problem and Linda was the victim. They were preparing for war, which meant they knew war was coming. That evening, Rob implemented phase 3 of his plan. He waited until Linda was in the shower, then called Derek's office from the house phone. Derek Phillips speaking. This is Robert Mitchell. I think we need to have a conversation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. About what? Derek finally managed. About my wife. About my daughter. About the choices you've been making. I don't know what you're talking about. Derek, I know everything. Every meeting, every message, every lie you've helped Linda tell. The question is whether we handle this like civilized men or whether I handle it my way. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a chance to minimize the damage. Meet me tomorrow night at the old quarry on Route 9. Come alone, and we'll discuss terms. Terms for what? For how much of your life you get to keep when this is over. Rob hung up and deleted the call from the phone's memory. Upstairs, he could hear Linda singing in the shower, probably planning her next move in what she thought was a chess game she could win. Rob spent the next day making final preparations. He visited 3 different banks, liquidating accounts Linda didn't know existed. He met with his lawyer, updating his will and Emma's custody arrangements. He called his former commanding officer, now retired in Montana, and arranged for Emma to spend her summer vacation there if necessary. Most importantly, he visited Maria Santos at her investigation firm. I need you to document everything, Rob told her, sliding a thick folder across her desk. The affair, the financial irregularities, the pattern of abuse toward my daughter. Make it official, legal, and unshakable. Maria flipped through the evidence Rob had gathered. Photos, recordings, financial records, witness statements from neighbors who'd observed Derek's frequent visits to the house. "This is comprehensive," she said. "More than enough for a divorce proceeding." "But Rob, this isn't just about divorce, is it?" "No, it's about making sure they never hurt Emma again, and making sure they never hurt another family." Maria studied his face. She'd seen that expression before, in places where the rules were different and justice was a luxury that civilized society couldn't always afford. "What do you need from me?" "Documentation. When this is over, I want the record to show exactly who they are and what they've done. I want it so clear that no court, no family member, no friend will ever take their side again." That night, Derek called Linda. Rob listened to the conversation through his surveillance equipment, watching Linda pace in their bedroom while she talked. "He wants to meet at the quarry," Derek said. "Linda, I think he's going to kill me." "Don't be ridiculous. Rob's not violent." "You didn't hear his voice. This isn't about talking things through. He knows everything, and he's planning something. So don't go." "And then what?" "You said yourself he'll destroy both of us. At least if I meet with him, maybe I can convince him to let me leave town quietly." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe that's for the best. Maybe you should leave town." "Are you serious? After everything we've planned? After what you said about protecting each other?" "Derek, I have a daughter to think about. If Rob's as dangerous as you think, I need to prioritize Emma's safety." Even Derek caught the lie in that statement. "You mean you need to prioritize your own safety? Think whatever you want. But if you're smart, you'll disappear before Rob decides talking isn't enough." Derek hung up without saying goodbye. Linda stood in their bedroom for a long moment, then began packing a small bag. She was preparing to run, abandoning Derek to face Rob's wrath alone. Rob watched his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, stuff cash and jewelry into an overnight bag, probably planning to disappear before the meeting at the quarry could take place. She was going to let Derek face the consequences of their affair alone while she escaped to start over somewhere else. But Linda had made one critical miscalculation. She thought Rob's anger was focused on Derek, that removing Derek from the equation would allow her to rebuild her marriage through manipulation and time. She had no idea that Rob's fury wasn't divided between them. It was multiplied by them. And tomorrow night, at the quarry, Derek would learn exactly what happened to men who hurt Robert Mitchell's daughter. But Derek's punishment would be only the beginning. Linda's reckoning was still coming. It would be far worse than anything Derek could imagine. Chapter 6. The Quarry. The abandoned quarry on Route 9 had been closed for 15 years, leaving behind a moonscape of broken stone and dark water. Local teenagers used it for parties and dares, but on weeknight evenings it was deserted, surrounded by dense woods that muffled sound and hid secrets. Rob arrived an hour early, positioning himself with tactical precision. He'd changed into dark clothing and military-grade boots, items he hadn't worn since his last overseas contract. The familiar weight of preparation settled around him like armor. Derek's headlights appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, sweeping across the quarry's entrance with nervous jerks as he navigated the rutted dirt road. Rob watched from the shadows as Derek parked near the water's edge and sat in his car for several minutes, gathering courage or perhaps writing final messages. When Derek finally emerged, he looked like a man walking to his execution. His usual cocky confidence had evaporated, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd finally realized he was outmatched. "Rob," Derek called into the darkness. "I'm here." Rob emerged from behind a pile of broken limestone, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories. Derek started violently at his appearance. "Jesus Christ, you scared me." "Good," Rob said. "Fear is appropriate right now." They stood 20 feet apart, the dark water of the quarry stretching behind Derek like an open grave. Rob had chosen the positioning deliberately. Derek's back to the water, no easy escape routes, nowhere to run. "Look, Rob, I know what this looks like," Derek began, his words tumbling over each other. "But Linda and we never meant for things to go this far. It just happened, you know? Sometimes people connect and—" "Stop talking," Rob said quietly. Derek's mouth snapped shut. You've been in my home, Rob continued. You've been with my wife. You've participated in the psychological abuse of my 8-year-old daughter. And now you're going to stand there and tell me it just happened? The thing with Emma, that wasn't my idea. That was all Linda and Carol. I told Linda she was being too hard on the kid. Rob smiled, and Derek took an involuntary step backward. You told Linda she was being too hard on Emma? That's interesting, because I have recordings of you calling my daughter not really family, and suggesting Linda should stop babying her. Derek's face went white. Recordings? I've been watching you for weeks, Derek. I know about your financial problems, your drinking, your pathetic attempts to seem important. I know you've been stealing from client accounts and filing fraudulent tax returns. I know you're 3 months behind on your office rent, and that your ex-wife took everything in the divorce because she discovered you were cheating with your secretary. Each revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. He was dealing with a man who'd done more than discover an affair. He was facing someone who'd systematically dissected his entire life. What do you want? Derek whispered. I want you to understand exactly who you've been fucking with, Rob said. I want you to know that Linda isn't some innocent housewife who got swept away by romance. She's a predator who targeted you because she thought you were weak enough to manipulate and wealthy enough to be useful. That's not true. She's been recording your conversations, Derek, keeping evidence of your financial crimes as insurance. If I'd never discovered the affair, she would have used that information to control you indefinitely. And when she was done with you, she would have destroyed you to protect herself. Derek's breathing was becoming labored. You're lying. Rob pulled out his phone and played a recording. Linda's voice, cold and calculating, describing Derek's vulnerabilities to Carol. He's so desperate for affection, he can't see I'm setting him up. If Rob ever finds out, I'll throw Derek under the bus and play the victim. Men like Derek are useful until they become liabilities. Derek staggered as if he'd been shot. When did she say that? Last week, while you were declaring your love and talking about running away together. The sound that escaped Derek's throat was somewhere between a sob and a scream. He'd been played by an expert, manipulated by someone who'd seen him coming from miles away. Here's what's going to happen, Rob continued. You're going to disappear. Tonight, you're going to close your business, settle your debts, and leave this state permanently. You will never contact Linda again, never mention Emma's name, and never return to this area. And if I don't, Rob's smile disappeared. Then I'll implement Plan B, which is, I'll release evidence of your financial crimes to the state licensing board, the IRS, and every client whose money you've stolen. I'll ensure that Linda's recordings of your conversations are discovered during the investigation. And then, when you're facing federal charges and have no money for legal defense, I'll visit you in prison. Derek was crying now, understanding that his life as he'd known it was over regardless of which path he chose. Why are you giving me an option to leave? Derek asked. Why not just destroy me here and now? Rob considered the question seriously. Because destroying you isn't my primary objective. Protecting Emma is. You leaving accomplishes that goal. You staying, in any capacity, forces me to escalate to methods that would upset my daughter. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Derek understood that Rob was offering mercy not for Derek's sake, but to avoid the complications that would come with more permanent solutions. How do I know you won't come after me, even if I leave? Because I keep my word, Rob said. But Derek, understand this clearly. If you ever threaten my family again, if you ever come near Emma, if you even search for her on social media, I will find you. And when I do, there won't be any conversations or choices. There will just be consequences. Derek nodded frantically. I'll leave. Tonight. I'll disappear completely. Good. Rob pulled an envelope from his jacket. There's $10,000 in cash. Enough to get you started somewhere else. Consider it severance pay. Derek took the envelope with shaking hands. Why would you help me? I'm not helping you. I'm buying insurance that you'll stay gone. Derek stumbled back toward his car, clutching the money like a lifeline. As he reached for the door handle, Rob called out one final time. Derek? Yeah. Linda's planning to run tonight, too. She's been packing while you were driving here. If you had any romantic notions about riding off into the sunset together, You should probably let those go. Derek's shoulders sagged with the weight of final defeat. He got into his car and drove away without looking back, carrying nothing but cash and the knowledge that he'd been played by everyone who'd claimed to care about him. Rob watched the taillights disappear into the woods, then pulled out his phone. Maria Santos answered on the first ring. "It's done," Rob said. "Derek Phillips will be leaving town tonight. Make sure the financial evidence gets to the appropriate authorities after he's gone. I want his business license revoked and his assets frozen, but only after he's had time to cross state lines." "What about Linda?" Rob looked across the dark water of the quarry, thinking about his wife packing her bags and planning her escape. She thought removing Derek would buy her time to rebuild her position, maybe even convince Rob that the affair had been Derek's idea all along. "Linda's punishment is just beginning," Rob said, "and it's going to be much worse than Derek's." Chapter 7. The Trap Closes. Linda was gone when Rob returned home at midnight. Emma was sleeping safely at their neighbor's house. Rob had arranged for a sleepover earlier in the day, knowing tonight would be complicated. The house felt different, empty, as if Linda's absence had lifted a poisonous cloud Rob hadn't realized was there. Linda's hasty packing job told a story of panic and guilt. She'd taken jewelry, cash, and important documents, but left behind photo albums and personal items that would be impossible to replace. This wasn't a planned departure. It was a desperate flight. Rob found the note on the kitchen counter, written in Linda's careful handwriting. "Rob, I need some time to think about our marriage. I'm staying with Carol for a few days while I figure things out. We need to talk about Emma's future and what's best for everyone. I love you both. Linda." Even fleeing in the middle of the night, Linda was still playing games, positioning herself as the thoughtful wife taking space to save their marriage. She had no idea that Rob had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Linda Mitchell checked into the Riverside Motel on Highway 14 at 11:47 p.m. Room 237. Paid cash for 3 nights. The message was from Tommy Kowalski, a former military police officer who now worked private security in the area. Rob had called in a favor, knowing Linda would avoid Carol's house despite what her note claimed. Linda was too smart to involve her sister in whatever came next. She'd want distance and deniability. Rob spent the next hour implementing the final phases of his plan. Phone calls to strategic contacts, transfer of electronic files, activation of surveillance protocols that had been dormant for weeks. By dawn, Linda would be trapped in a web she didn't even know existed. The next morning, Rob picked up Emma from the sleepover and took her to breakfast at her favorite diner. She was unusually quiet, picking at her pancakes instead of devouring them with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm. "Daddy, where's Linda?" "She had to go visit your Aunt Carol for a few days," Rob said gently. "Sometimes adults need to spend time with their families." Emma nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Is she coming back?" Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing intelligence and intuition that most adults underestimated. Emma had sensed the tension in their house, the subtle shifts in relationship dynamics that children noticed even when they couldn't articulate them. "Maybe not, sweetheart. How would you feel about that?" Emma considered the question seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Would it just be you and me again? Just you and me? That would be okay," Emma said quietly. "Linda's been different lately. Not mean exactly, but not nice the way she used to be." Rob felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. Emma had noticed Linda's changing behavior, the gradual erosion of affection and protection. His daughter was more perceptive than anyone had given her credit for. "You know what, Em? How about we spend the day doing whatever you want? Movies, ice cream, that bookstore you love." Emma's face brightened for the first time in weeks. "Really? The whole day? The whole day? Just the two of us?" While Emma ran to get her jacket, Rob's phone rang. Maria Santos's voice was crisp and professional. "Linda tried to access the joint accounts this morning. The banks flagged the attempts as suspicious and froze everything pending investigation." "Perfect. What about the other arrangements?" "The private investigator your friend Derek hired never existed. The phone number goes to a disconnected line, and the address was a vacant office building. Linda's going to spend the next few days chasing shadows. Rob smiled grimly. Linda thought she was being clever, hiring someone to investigate Rob's background and find leverage for divorce proceedings. She had no idea that Detective Morrison was actually another of Rob's former colleagues, feeding her false information and documenting her attempts at manipulation. The employment verification checks also came back interesting, Maria continued. Turns out Linda's been lying about her volunteer work for the past 6 months. The children's charity she claimed to manage? They've never heard of her. The literacy program she supposedly ran doesn't exist. Linda had been creating fictional charitable work to explain her absences while seeing Derek. She'd been building an elaborate facade of community involvement to cover for her affairs. Another layer of deception that painted her character clearly. Maria, I need you to arrange one more thing. Can you have someone deliver a package to Linda at the motel? Nothing threatening, just information she needs to see. What kind of information? Evidence that her escape plan isn't as clever as she thinks it is. That afternoon, while Rob and Emma were at the movies, Linda received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photocopies of her bank attempts, photographs of her entering the motel, and a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Your husband isn't as predictable as you thought. Your lover isn't as loyal as you hoped. Your sister isn't as helpful as you expected. You're alone now, and every move you make is being watched. If you want to negotiate the terms of your surrender, call the number below. You have 24 hours. The phone number belonged to Maria's office, but Linda wouldn't know that. Linda called Carol immediately, her voice shrill with panic. Carol, something's wrong. Rob knows everything, and he's been planning this. I need help. Carol's response was exactly what Rob had anticipated. Linda, I can't get involved in your marriage problems. If Rob's really as dangerous as you think, I need to protect my boys. Maybe you should consider going back home and working things out. Linda's support system was crumbling exactly as Rob had engineered. Derek was gone. Her financial resources were frozen, and now her sister was backing away to protect herself. Linda was discovering that the relationships she'd thought she could rely on were all conditional, based on her ability to project strength and stability. That evening, Linda made the call to Maria's number. This is Linda Mitchell. I received your message. Mrs. Mitchell, my client is prepared to discuss terms for an amicable separation. Are you interested in hearing his proposal? Who is your client? I think you know the answer to that question. Linda was quiet for a long moment. What kind of terms? The kind that allow you to leave with your dignity intact instead of having your life systematically destroyed piece by piece. But Mrs. Mitchell, this offer expires tomorrow at noon. After that, my client will pursue other options. What other options? The kind that involve federal prosecutors, family court judges, and very public revelations about your character and behavior. The kind that ensure you never get custody or visitation rights with Emma, and that your family and friends understand exactly who you really are. Linda hung up without responding, but Rob knew she'd call back. She was trapped, isolated, and running out of resources. More importantly, she was finally beginning to understand that she'd seriously underestimated the man she'd betrayed. That night, as Rob tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. Daddy, are you and Linda getting divorced? Rob sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Yes, sweetheart, we are. Emma nodded solemnly. Is it because of what happened at Aunt Carol's house? That was part of it. But mostly it's because Linda and I want different things, and we can't make each other happy anymore. Will I still get to see her? Rob studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of distress or attachment that would complicate his decisions. What he saw instead was curiosity mixed with relief. Do you want to see her? Emma thought about it seriously. Maybe sometimes, but not if she's going to be mean to me or make you sad. Rob kissed his daughter's forehead, marveling at her resilience and wisdom. You know what, Em? I think you and I are going to be just fine on our own. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Rob's phone buzzed with a final message from Maria. Target accepted meeting for tomorrow morning. She's ready to negotiate. Rob deleted the message and settled into his study to review the divorce papers he'd been preparing for weeks. Linda thought she was walking into negotiations, but she was actually walking into a surrender ceremony. The trap had been set, the prey was cornered, and tomorrow Rob would offer Linda one last choice. Accept his terms and disappear quietly, or face the full consequences of betraying a man who never forgot and never forgave. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Linda arrived at the coffee shop on Main Street, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she scanned the room for familiar faces. Maria Santos sat in a corner booth, dressed in a conservative business suit that made her look like a corporate attorney. She'd chosen this location specifically, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough for serious conversation, and close enough to the courthouse to send a subtle message about the legal consequences hovering over Linda's future. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said as Linda approached. "Thank you for coming." Linda slid into the booth opposite Maria, her movements sharp with nervous energy. "Where's Rob? My client prefers to handle these matters through representation. I'm Maria Santos, attorney and private investigator. Mr. Mitchell has retained my services to facilitate a clean resolution to your marriage. I want to talk to my husband directly." "That's no longer an option, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has presented you with a choice, and you have exactly," Maria checked her watch, 4 hours to make your decision. Linda's composure cracked slightly. "What decision?" Maria opened a thick folder and began laying out documents with methodical precision. Bank records showing Derek's financial crimes. Photographs of Linda entering Derek's office building at suspicious hours. Transcripts of recorded conversations between Linda and Derek discussing their affair and their cruel treatment of Emma. "The choice is simple," Maria continued. "You can sign the divorce agreement we've prepared, which includes very specific terms about your future behavior and your complete surrender of any claims to Mr. Mitchell's assets or custody of Emma. Or you can refuse, and we'll present this evidence in open court while pursuing federal charges against your former lover for financial fraud." Linda stared at the evidence spread across the table, her face cycling through emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, something approaching panic. "This is blackmail." "No, Mrs. Mitchell. Blackmail would involve asking you for money or favors in exchange for silence. This is consequences. You committed adultery, conspired to psychologically abuse a child, and aided a man you knew was committing financial crimes. We're offering you a chance to escape those consequences through voluntary compliance." Linda picked up one of the photographs, herself and Derek embracing outside his office, and studied it with growing horror. "How long has Rob been watching me?" "Long enough to document everything. Your husband is very thorough, Mrs. Mitchell. Military training tends to instill that quality." "What are the terms?" Maria slid a legal document across the table. "Complete dissolution of marriage with no financial settlement for you. Mr. Mitchell keeps the house, all bank accounts, investments, and vehicles. You surrender any claim to Emma's custody or visitation. I helped raise that child for 4 years. You participated in her psychological abuse for months," Maria replied coldly. "The recordings make that very clear." Linda read through the document, her face growing paler with each page. "This leaves me with nothing. It leaves you with your freedom and your anonymity. The alternative is federal prosecution, public humiliation, and complete social destruction. Your choice. What about Derek? What happened to him?" Mr. Phillips chose to relocate rather than face the consequences of his actions. A wise decision, all things considered. Linda set down the papers with trembling hands. "Rob planned all of this, didn't he? From the moment he found out about the affair. Mr. Mitchell is a strategic thinker. You betrayed his trust and threatened his daughter's well-being. Did you really think he would respond with forgiveness and counseling?" Linda laughed bitterly. "I thought I knew him. I thought he was just another suburban husband who would fight for his marriage and try to win me back. You misjudged your husband quite severely. What if I refuse to sign?" Maria's expression hardened. "Then tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrest Derek Phillips for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. During that investigation, they'll discover evidence of your affair and your knowledge of his crimes. The local newspaper will receive copies of all the evidence, including the recordings where you discuss manipulating Emma and planning to frame your husband for emotional abuse if he discovered your relationship. Linda closed her eyes, understanding that every angle had been covered, every escape route blocked. Your family will learn that you've been lying about your charitable work to cover for your affairs. Your friends will discover that you were planning to destroy your husband's reputation to protect your lover. Emma will see documentation of how you really felt about her, including your statement that she was damaged goods who needed to learn her place. Stop, Linda whispered. And your sister Carol will face investigation for child abuse based on her son's treatment of Emma and her participation in covering for your lies. I understand she's already struggling financially since her divorce. Federal scrutiny would probably destroy what's left of her stability. Linda's hands were shaking openly now. Rob hadn't just planned her destruction. He'd engineered the complete collapse of everyone who'd enabled her betrayal. How do I know Rob will keep his word if I sign this? Because Mr. Mitchell's military record shows he's a man who honors his agreements. Sign the documents, disappear quietly, and you'll never hear from him again. Refuse, and you'll discover exactly what he's capable of when someone threatens his daughter. Linda stared at the divorce papers for a long moment, then picked up the pen Maria offered. Where do I sign? Every page that's marked with an X. Initial each paragraph that outlines your behavioral restrictions. As Linda signed away her marriage, her claims to Emma, and her future in their community, Maria made notes in a separate file. Each signature was being documented, creating an unbreakable legal record of Linda's voluntary surrender. There's one final matter, Maria said when Linda finished signing. Mr. Mitchell wants you to understand something clearly. What? If you ever attempt to contact Emma through social media, mail, phone calls, or any third party, Mr. Mitchell will consider that a violation of this agreement. If you ever return to this area or attempt to interfere in Emma's life in any way, the protection this document provides will be null and void. Linda nodded numbly. And Mrs. Mitchell? Mr. Mitchell wants you to know that he'll be monitoring your activities for the foreseeable future, not out of lingering attachment, but out of paternal responsibility. If you ever put another child at risk the way you put Emma at risk, he'll ensure the appropriate authorities are notified. Linda stood to leave, moving like a woman who'd aged years in the span of an hour. At the door, she turned back to Maria with one final question. Will you tell Rob something for me? If it's appropriate, tell him I'm sorry. Not about the affair, that was my choice, but about Emma. She deserved better from me. Linda walked out of the coffee shop and out of Rob and Emma's lives forever. Maria watched through the window as Linda got in her car and drove away, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she'd been completely, methodically destroyed by a man she'd thought she could manipulate. Maria gathered the signed documents and called Rob. It's done. She signed everything and she's gone. Any problems? None. She understood exactly what was at stake. Oh, and Rob? She asked me to tell you she was sorry about Emma. Rob was quiet for a moment. Too little, too late. What now? Now I go home to my daughter and we start over. Clean slate, no looking back. And Linda? Linda made her choices. She'll live with the consequences. As Maria drove toward the courthouse to file the divorce papers, Rob was picking up Emma from school. His daughter ran toward him with the unburdened joy of a child who sensed that whatever dark cloud had been hanging over their family was finally lifting. How was school, sweetheart? Rob asked as Emma buckled her seatbelt. Good. Mrs. Peterson said I could be in the advanced reading group next semester. And guess what? Sarah's mom invited me to their family camping trip next month. Rob smiled, hearing excitement in Emma's voice that had been missing for weeks. That sounds like fun. We'll talk to Sarah's mom about the details. Daddy, are you happy today? Rob looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, seeing her bright eyes and genuine smile. Yes, Em. I'm very happy today. Me too. I feel like everything's going to be okay now. Everything's going to be better than okay, Rob promised. Everything's going to be perfect. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Rob stood in the kitchen of their remodeled home, watching Emma practice piano in the living room. The house felt different now. lighter, warmer, filled with the kind of genuine happiness that couldn't be manufactured or performed. They'd rearranged furniture, painted walls, and created new traditions that belonged entirely to them. Emma had thrived since Linda's departure in ways that surprised even Rob. Her grades improved, she made new friends, and the quiet anxiety that had shadowed her for months gradually disappeared. Most importantly, she'd stopped walking on eggshells, stopped trying to anticipate adult moods and reactions. "Daddy, did I tell you what happened at lunch today?" Emma called from the piano bench. "No, sweetheart. What happened?" "Mason tried to take my cookies, so I told him my dad was a soldier and he'd better give them back." Emma grinned. "He gave them back really fast." Rob laughed. You can't use my military background to intimidate kids into sharing their lunch." "Why not?" "It worked. Because it's not fair to use fear to get what you want." Emma considered this seriously. "But what if someone's being mean and they won't stop? Then you use your words first, get help from a teacher second, and only defend yourself physically if absolutely necessary. What if all of those don't work?" Rob set down his coffee and joined Emma at the piano. "Then you tell me, and I'll handle it. Like you handled Linda and Derek?" The question caught Rob off guard. They rarely talked about Linda anymore, and Emma had never mentioned Derek by name before. "What do you mean, sweetheart? I know they were being mean to you and to me, and I know you made them go away. Sarah's mom told her mom that you were a hero for protecting me." Rob felt a complex mix of pride and concern. He'd been careful to shield Emma from the details of Linda's departure, but apparently their small community had drawn its own conclusions about the sudden end of his marriage. "Emma, I need you to understand something important. What happened with Linda wasn't about being a hero. It was about making sure you're safe and happy." "I know. That's what dads do, right? Protect their kids." "That's exactly what dads do." Emma returned to her piano practice, but Rob continued to think about their conversation. The truth was that the last 6 months had been a revelation. Without Linda's subtle manipulations and manufactured drama, both he and Emma had discovered aspects of themselves they'd forgotten or never known existed. Rob had started dating again, cautiously, with Emma's well-being as his primary consideration. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, Emma's pediatrician, had expressed interest during a routine appointment, and their first coffee date had turned into weekly dinners that Emma sometimes joined. Jennifer understood the complexity of dating a single father with a protective nature, and she seemed genuinely fond of Emma rather than merely tolerating her. More importantly, Rob had reconnected with parts of himself that Linda's presence had somehow stifled. He'd started a small consulting business helping other veterans transition to civilian careers. He coached Emma's soccer team. He'd even begun teaching a self-defense class at the community center, primarily for women and children. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Rob opened it to find Maria Santos holding a bottle of wine and wearing a rare smile. "This is unexpected," Rob said. "Come in." Maria entered and waved at Emma, who waved back before returning to her piano. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I had some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." They sat in the kitchen while Emma's piano music provided a cheerful background. Maria poured herself coffee from the pot Rob offered and settled back in her chair. "Derek Phillips was arrested in Nevada 3 weeks ago," she began. "Turns out he tried to restart his accounting practice using forged credentials. The Nevada State Board of Accountancy ran a routine background check and discovered his history. Is he facing charges? Multiple federal charges. Tax fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and violation of his professional license restrictions. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum." Rob felt a grim satisfaction. Derek had been given a chance to disappear and start over honestly, but his fundamental nature had reasserted itself. Some people never learn from consequences. What about Linda? That's the interesting part. Linda's been living in Phoenix under her maiden name, working as a receptionist at a dental office. No criminal activity, no attempts to contact you or Emma, no social media presence. She's essentially vanished from her old life completely. Rob nodded. Linda had kept her end of the agreement, which was more than he'd expected given her manipulative nature. "There's more," Maria continued. "Carol contacted my office last week. Her boys are in therapy for behavioral problems, and she wanted to apologize to you and Emma for what happened at her house. What did you tell her? I told her that apologies are meaningless without changed behavior, and that any contact with your family would need to go through me first. She understood. Emma finished her piano practice and joined them in the kitchen, climbing into the chair next to Rob. Are you talking about grown-up stuff? We are, Rob said, but we're almost finished. Can I listen? Rob looked at Maria, who shrugged. It's your call. Emma, Maria is telling me that some people who weren't very nice to us before are being held responsible for their choices. Like when kids at school get in trouble for bullying. Emma nodded seriously. Good. People should get in trouble when they're mean. But here's the important part, Rob continued. We don't spend our time thinking about those people anymore. We focus on our life, our happiness, and the people who treat us well. Like Jennifer and her kids? Rob smiled. Emma had taken to Jennifer's twin daughters immediately, and the four of them had formed an easy friendship that was slowly developing into something deeper. Exactly like Jennifer and her kids. Maria finished her coffee and prepared to leave. At the door, she turned back to Rob with a final observation. You know, in all my years doing this kind of work, I've never seen someone implement such a comprehensive response to betrayal. Most people want revenge that's quick and visible. What you did was create long-term consequences that taught real lessons. I wasn't trying to teach lessons, Rob replied. I was trying to protect Emma. Same thing in this case. Emma learned that the adults in her life will fight for her. Derek learned that actions have consequences. Linda learned that manipulation has limits. And your community learned that you're not someone to underestimate. After Maria left, Rob and Emma spent the evening cooking dinner together, a new tradition they'd established to end each day. Emma chattered about school, friends, and her plans for the weekend, her voice bright with the confidence of a child who felt completely secure. As they sat down to eat, Emma asked one final question about the conversation with Maria. Daddy, are you glad Linda's gone? Rob considered his answer carefully. I'm glad we're both safe and happy, Em. I'm glad you don't have to worry about adults being unfair to you. And I'm glad it's just you and me figuring out our life together. What if you get married again someday? If I do, it will be to someone who loves you as much as I do and who makes our family stronger, not weaker. Emma smiled. Like Jennifer? Maybe like Jennifer. But that's a decision we'd make together as a team. I like being on your team, Daddy. I like being on your team too, sweetheart. As they finished dinner and began their evening cleanup routine, Rob reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a man discovering that his marriage was built on lies and his daughter was being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to love her. Today, he was a father who had eliminated every threat to his child's well-being and built a life foundation strong enough to support whatever future they chose to create together. Linda was in Phoenix, living with the consequences of her choices. Derek was in prison, learning that charm couldn't overcome criminal behavior. Carol was in therapy with her sons, hopefully learning to be a better parent and person. And Rob and Emma were home, safe, happy, and free to write the next chapter of their story however they chose. Rob had kept his promise to himself and to Emma. He had protected what mattered most, eliminated what threatened them, and never compromised his principles in the process. Some men forgive and forget. Others ensure that forgiveness becomes unnecessary because threats simply cease to exist. Rob Mitchell had chosen the latter path, and both he and Emma were stronger for it. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and secured by the unshakable foundation Rob had built through strength, planning, and the absolute refusal to let anyone hurt his daughter ever again. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.